Hey everyone, today in honor of the Homecoming trailer arriving, I'm going to be showing you how we at Magnanimous rank the Spider-Man films as a whole franchise, including the Raimi trilogy and the Amazing series. This series as a whole is a bit hit or miss so far, but if you look at everything at a whole, it's good that we've had those beautiful disasters happen, or else we wouldn't have Spider-Man Homecoming swinging in a few months and Tom Holland as our new weapon. Alright, let's get into the reviews. Now, at the bottom of this list is the infamous For All the Wrong Reasons Amazing Spider-Man 2, or Amazing Spider-Man 2 A Rise of Electro, or whatever Sony decides to name it this week. Ugh, just saying that name makes me get flashbacks to that horrible dubstep version of the Itsy Bitsy Spider song when Electro hits those power pylons.
I hate this song!
Now, I know most of you are probably thinking, how could this be worse than Emo Peter dancing in Spider-Man 3? Don't worry, after this review of this clusterfuck of a film, you'll see what I'm talking about. When I said to the group that I would do the Spider-Man movie reviews, I decided that I'd watch these films again. The thought of watching all these again wasn't too daunting, even having to go through the Emo Peter dancing again. But then it hit me, I'm gonna have to watch Amazing Spider-Man 2. And my head sunk. I didn't want to watch it. That I'd only seen it once in the cinemas, and I swore I wouldn't put myself through that crap again. It's a burden. It feels like a job to put yourself through this film again. With its horrible I hate you, I love you plot between Peter and Gwen, Sparky the electric prick going evil because Spider-Man didn't remember me, the weird-ass herpes green goblin whose father tells him, don't worry, the disease won't kill you for another 50 years, and Harry Osborn takes that, oh, I'm probably going to die tomorrow, so I gotta get Spider-Man's blood, blah, 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 blah. Just this reviewing this movie is pissing me off. Now, the worst part of this film is the worst ending to a superhero movie, or nay, any movie of all time. We are literally left mid-fight scene, and the screen fades to black, and ends the same way the bloody trailer does. Then Stoney sticks their fingers at the screen and says, ha ha ha, fuck you guys, come back for the sequel in a few years to find out what happened. Like, what the shit is that, Sony? This film should have been called Amazing Setup for a Sinister Six film Rise of Product Placement. To even push the point that Rhino would be a major player of the film, he is shown in almost every piece of advertisement for this film, as seen in here, here, and here. And he ends up having less screen time than Stan Lee's cameo in the film. Jesus, I can't talk about this film too much longer, I'm going to lose it. The only half-decent things in this movie that didn't make me want to snap the disc and then my neck was the 2 or so minute long montage of Spider-Man just being Spider-Man, rescuing people, and adds a bit of humor that was surprisingly funny. And one of the 1 or 2 songs on the soundtrack weren't horrible. This film is bad, and it's a well-deserved 4.3 dead Spider-Man franchises out of 10. Now, next on the chopping block in 4th place is Spider-Man 3 with all of its dancing glory. Now, the second this film started and I heard a different version of the beautiful and breathtaking Spider-Man theme song from the first 2 films, my spider senses started tingling. This film is the original example of how too many plots can screw everything up. The first plot is a basic love story with Pete and Mary Jane, then a revenge plot from Gobby Jr. who tries to, and fails, to flow with the mediocre love story. The Sandman plot, which was probably my favorite of the film, as it actually attempts to play with your heartstrings. And then the Venom plot, which was excruciatingly lazy, and it shits on its source material, worse than it did in Civil War last year. Who, although does look really bad, could have looked much worse. Much, much worse. The only reason that this film isn't last place is because it does deliver us some decent action sequences and showing us Peter lose his shit as Black Suit Spider-Man on Sandman when he finds out Marco was his uncle's real killer. What would have made even more sense for this film to do is give us one of these villains and dedicate a whole film to them, or hell, maybe even have two maximum in a film. Now, the reason most people hate this film is because of Peter's emo transformation. But to be fair, the reason he's doing those hip thrusts and finger clicks is because he's a nerd. He's a geek at heart, and he's doing what he as a nerd thinks cool people do, which is why I don't really care about those scenes, and I find them quite funny, and it doesn't even match close to the burning hatred I have for Amazing Spider-Man 2. In conclusion, this film is held together by an overcomplicated revenge/love/redemption/horror alien. I don't know what to call that fucking Venom shit. This film was the first movie I've ever been disappointed in, as I remember my 8-year-old self seeing the trailer and getting myself so excited and walking out of that cinema thinking, oh, was that it? From an 8-year-old. Probably the target audience of this film. That's why I have to give this film a lazy 5 out of 10. Sitting comfortably in third place is Amazing Spider-Man. Now, as far as reboots go, this isn't a bad one, but at the same time, it isn't a great one. With us being introduced to a no Peter Parker played by Andrew Garfield, who did try his hardest to try and win over a new generation of Spider-Man fans, which I do have to congratulate him as I think he did portray a better Spider-Man, meaning more jokes and more carefree, but not a better Peter Parker than Tobey Maguire, as I'm not a huge fan of Pete being a hipster skater dude, but, you know, the faults fall more on the writers and directors than Garfield himself. The film stays reasonably safe and doesn't try anything too radical, which I don't mind after Amazing Spider-Man 3 and its 101 plots. I also liked the vigilante Peter montage of him going around looking for his uncle's murderer, which helped push how truly hard it was for him to have all those great abilities and not be able to help his loved one when he needed it the most, and the crane scene, which, although tried for citizens of New York helping Spider-Man, like the bridge scene in Spider-Man 1 and the train scene in Spider-Man 2, doesn't really work out the same, as although it was awesome and it did look completely amazing, it didn't sort of feel the same, as they just sort of seemed like they were just doing it because their boss said so and didn't really care that much. On to the film's main villain, Lizard. Now, Lizard was a good choice for a Spider-Man movie villain. Whether they did him right or not is another story. I did like at first his reasoning for wanting to be whole again, as that's what pushed Dr. Connors, a crippled war veteran, to try his radical treatment. But then after his transformation, he turns into a literal cold-blooded killer for reasons unknown. He says he's going to go and kill Norman Osborn's right-hand man because he shut down his work and said that he used the formula on other veterans to see the effects, which Connors disagrees with, which is fair enough, but then decides after that everyone has to be lizards, chucking a complete 360 and changing his mind, to which everyone in the cinema is left dumbfounded. This film isn't a horrible in any way. It's a solid reboot that isn't too special, and it isn't a flop, so it deserves a 7 out of 10. We're getting close to first place now, with second place going to the film that got me into comic books, Spider-Man. Probably the most emotional and touching Spider-Man film of all time, this film is great in almost every way. Almost. Tobey Maguire plays a brilliant Peter Parker, as you can truly believe that he is a geeky nerd, but doesn't really play the ideal Spider-Man, which I can forgive, as I don't see this film as only a Spider-Man origin story, but at the same time a coming-of-age story for our webhead. Although Peter does leave high school only around halfway through the film, which does differ from most origin stories which have him in school for a few years with his powers, I'm okay with it, as this incarnation of Spider-Man wants to show us his life as an adult that's fresh out of high school trying to find his way in the Big Apple. As a whole, this film delivers on everything you want in a Spider-Man origin story, showing us the loss of Peter's uncle and him growing and learning his new arsenal, and using these new abilities and the final fight scene between Spidey and Green Goblin.
Godspeed, Spider-Man.
which, although is basic, is really fun and entertaining no matter how many times viewed. The only real reason that this film isn't first place is because of Green Goblin's Power Ranger outfit. But as the test design showed for a synthetic green-skinned yellow-eyed goblin, although more comic accurate, I think it's better that they went with the Green Ranger suit. And the almost forced relationship between Peter and Harry, which sometimes felt unnatural and sort of put on. This film is great on so many levels and deserves a 7.8 out of 10. On top of this list is Spider-Man 2, or as I know it, the greatest Spider-Man movie with Mary Jane occasionally being annoying. Where to start? This film is a Swiss Army knife of movies, including Peter's powers failing on him due to a change in his psychosis, a boring yet simple love story ultimately needed to further the plot, a mad scientist affected and turned into a monster with a consciousness and a revenge plot that is executed perfectly with Harry's hatred for the web slinger. Now this seems a lot like Spider-Man 3 and Amazing Spider-Man 2, with multiple plots, but the big difference is these two films is the fact that the second film not only has interesting plots, but also knows how to bring all these stories together to form a great tale of Spider-Man growing and changing in the man he is today. Now, unlike some of the other films on this list, this film has amazing action sequences, but limits itself to only having 3 really big fight scenes between Spidey and Doc Ock. I love this, as instead of having 5 or 6 fight scenes, this movie decides to give us 3 huge scenes and move the focus to having a great plot instead of just showing action upon action while making us digest half-assed plots. Age of Ultron. Now on to the villain, Dr. Otto Octavius is, I believe, the perfect choice for where this series needed to go, as he isn't as campy or as dark as some of the other Spider villains. And who better to play him than Alfred Molina, who I think actually stole the show with just his performance, as the emotions he portrays truly shows how well Molina played his part. I still think the 2 best sequences in the entirety of the Spider-Man films is a surgery scene, which let us know that Sam Raimi still has a little bit of horror up his sleeve.
Anybody here take shop class?
And the train scene, which alone embodies everything that Spider-Man is to the city and New York, in not only the comics, but also how people would react to him being in today's society.
Nice and easy to go down. Slower, gently.
Another example of the people being with Spider-Man in this trilogy is the bridge scene in the first film of the trilogy, in which civilians, knowing that Green Goblin could easily kill them, started throwing bricks at him and shouting, "You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us." These 2 scenes perfectly explain what and who Spidey is to the people of New York, which is why the first 2 films of the franchise work so well, as they try to be grounded in realism and succeed in that to the utmost perfection. Now to wrap this up, Spider-Man 2 is almost the perfect Spider-Man film, except for Mary Jane just being a plot tool used to screw with Peter. But nonetheless, Spider-Man 2 deserves all the praise it gets, and for that it's given an 8.8 out of 10. Well guys, thanks for sticking around so long, And all I can say is let's hope that Homecoming is as good as Spider-Man 2. I'm Mossy, and this is Magnanimous.